Our first speaker is Dr. Paulina Machuca. She is a research professor at El Colegio de Michoacan and a visiting professor from the University of Toulouse. In recent years, she has specialized in the history of biocultural exchanges between Mexico and the Philippines from the 16th to the 18th centuries. Among her more recent publications are the book coordinated with Thomas Calvo entitled Mexico y Filipinas, Culturas y Memoria sobre el Pacífico, published by El Colegio de Michoacan and the Ateneo de Manila University, and Historia Minima de Filipinas, published by El Colegio de Mexico. In 2019, she received the Francisco Javier Clavijero Award for the best history book in Mexico, entitled El Vino de Cocos en la Nueva España, Historia de una Transculturación en el siglo XVII, in which she analyzes the introduction of the coconut palm tree and the production of lambanog, which I suspect is what she is drinking in this photo, on the Mexican Pacific coast. She has been a visiting professor at various academic institutions in Spain, France, and the Philippines, and she is with us this afternoon to share with us her talk on the dissemination of plants in the Pacific, the other history of the Manila Galleon Trade, 16th to 18th centuries. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Dr. Paulina Machuca. Dr. Machuca, the space is yours.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the Ateneo de Manila University and the organizers of this international conference series, especially to Father Francis Navarro and Nikki Carsey. By the way, in the photo, I'm drinking tuba in Bohol.
Thank you.
So I will start to share my presentation. Do you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
All right. For many years, the history of the Manila Galleon Trade has privileged economic and political issues. However, in recent years, other approaches have emerged in realizing the importance of the Trans-Pacific route for the exchange of social and cultural elements and the role that plants have played in transforming landscapes and cuisines on both sides of the Pacific. Today, the typical landscape of the Mexican Pacific coast is as shown in this photo. If we observe, the coconut palm tree, the Asian almond tree, and the mango tree predominate. These are all trees that came through the galleon, but nowadays, the local inhabitants consider them to be native to that region. On the other hand, there are trees of Mexican origin that took root in the Philippines landscape and culture, such as the calachuchi. By the way, in Mexico is the sacalasuchitl. It is interesting to note that this tree preserved the name Nahua, the name of Nahua origin that is from Mesoamerica. And the calachuchi is highly appreciated throughout the archipelago for its aesthetic shape and the beauty of its flowers. There are even streets that bear that name, streets that bear the name of Calachuchi, which tells us about the cultural importance for the inhabitants of the island. In this sense, studying the dissemination of plants across the Pacific becomes a highly relevant topic for understanding the ecological and social transformations as a consequence of the exchange of tropical plants between Asia and America during the early modern globalization. For historians, it is not only a matter of making account of the plant species that cross the so-called Spanish Lake, but also of tracing their insertion, adaptation, transformation, and the use of plant resources both in the Philippines and in Mexico. At the same time, analyzing the circulation of plants in the Spanish Empire is not the same as analyzing the circulation of objects. Plants are living beings that need to be transported under certain physical conditions in order to withstand long journeys across the oceans. And once the plants reach another country or another continent, it is necessary to plant them in suitable places with similar climate and soil conditions as the place of origin. If the plant manages to acclimatize successfully at the destination, we move from a stage of biological adaptation to another stage of social adaptation. This step is crucial because success or failure depends on it. We have seen societies that adopt a foreign plant are capable of adapting and transforming them in multiple ways, thanks to the use and management of these plant resources. Since I only have 15 minutes, in this presentation, I will show just a few examples of biocultural phenomena that I've observed while working on this topic. Let's start with maize, a case of complementarity. It is estimated that between 1565 and 1815, around 230 plant species were transported between Mexico and the Philippines. Most of the plants that spread through the Manila Galleon were edible plants, such as grains, vegetables, fruits, and spices. In the second half of the 16th century, the main grains at a global level were already known in the 4 continents. It was then that rice from Asia began to be cultivated in Acapulco, and corn from America was successfully inserted in the Philippine archipelago. This photo shows a corn seller on a street in Cebu. It is impressive to see that this same scene could be located on any street in Mexico. Corn with salt and chili, which is really delicious. Corn became a substitute for rice in times of famine in the Philippines. According to Father Alcina, around 1668, in the Visayas region, the natives cultivated corn as a complementary food to rice. Thus, around their rice fields, they planted corn and millet. In addition, Gaspar de San Agustin asserted in his work Conquest of the Philippine Islands of 1698 that the corn brought from America has been a great remedy to supply lack of rice because of the ease with which it is achieved and the much fruit that it yields. This phenomenon is interesting because something similar happened in Mexico, where wheat from the Mediterranean became a substitute for corn in times of scarcity. Let's go to coconut, a case of displacement. An important ecological phenomenon that happened in Mexico is the displacement of native palms, such as cayaco, by the coconut, as we see on the slide. In this map, this is a typical landscape in Colima, and this is the map. In this map, we see that the coconut reached the American continent through the Spanish in the Pacific, but also the Portuguese through the Atlantic. In the world of tropical fruits, the coconut palm spread very quickly throughout the Mexican Pacific coast. In the year 1612, the inhabitants of Colima in New Spain obtained multiple benefits from palm tree: food, drink, oil, milk, sugar, but also construction. That is why the word palapa is very familiar to us in Mexico. This early use was due to the traditional knowledge of the Filipinos who settled in the Palm States, where they taught the natives and the Spanish about the benefits of the coconut. The chili, a case of cultivars or new cultivars. The case of chili is interesting because it was a condiment that was adapted very quickly in the archipelago, where the cultivar called siling labuyo was developed after the Manila Galleon Trade. This is an example of siling labuyo in Bohol. In this map, we see that Chile reached Asia and Africa in the 16th century through the Spanish and the Portuguese. Chile is present in Philippine gastronomy through various forms, including acharas, as seen in the slide. I would like to emphasize that many of the words of Nahua origin are preserved in the Philippines and are precisely about plants that are preserved in the Philippines are precisely about plants as we see on the slide. Let's go quickly to tobacco and cocoa, two cases of plant and material culture. In the case of stimulants, the Philippines received tobacco and cocoa. William Dampier, in his Voyage Around the World, published in 1697, mentioned that Mindanao tobacco was of great quality, even better than that grown in Manila. Ethnic groups in the Cordillera in northern Luzon also adopted tobacco and even made their own pipes. This is an example of the plants, but also the material culture that is developed with it. Cocoa today is considered native to the Philippines, although it is one of the introductions through the Manila Galleon. Sicuate, for example, the quintessential Filipino hot chocolate, is one of the introductions too. But Filipinos not only received cocoa, but also the Mexican metate for grinding the seeds. While Mexican women have used for thousands of years the metate for grinding corn, in the Philippines, this instrument was adapted for the elaboration of hot chocolate and grinding the seeds of cocoa, and the metate conserving the Nahua name as shown in the third photo. Let's come back to the Cocos nucifera, or cocoa, and the case of alcohol production. The case of alcohol production is very broad. I will only say that Filipinos introduced the tuba in Colima and Acapulco towards the end of the 16th century. In the slide, we observe how tuberos, or mananguete, extract the sap from the palm tree and then prepare it to sell in local markets. This is a local market also in Bohol, and this is in Colima, Mexico. I don't have enough time to develop this topic, but if you are interested in the history of this drink from a comparative perspective between Mexico and the Philippines, I invite you to watch this documentary that is available on YouTube with English subtitles. One of the great contributions of the Philippines to Mexico was the introduction of the technique to distill alcohol beverages. In the 17th century, Filipinos produced coconut wine, which is lambanog, in Colima and Acapulco. This drink could reach 40 to 50 degrees of alcoholic volume. The lambanog was the basis for the production of the first mezcals in Mexico. In other words, our mezcal, the Mexican national drink, along with tequila, has an Asian influence in its origin. I have studied all this in the book El Vino de Cocos en la Nueva España. Vino de Cocos is lambanog, of course. Let's go quickly to piña, a paradigmatic case of ethnobotany. I will finish my presentation with piña because it's a paradigmatic case in ethnobotany. One of the things that has impressed me the most about the Philippine culture is its ability or skills to make beautiful garments from natural fibers. Who would have thought that Filipino ingenuity would be able to transform pineapple fiber into clothing? The pineapple is native to the Amazon region and traveled to Asia in the 16th century, thanks to the Portuguese and the Spanish. Antonio de Morga mentioned that pineapple was already present in the Philippine archipelago at the beginning of the 17th century. Pineapple is one of the best examples of how a foreign plant can be successfully inserted, adapted, and transformed by the host population. On the slide, we have an example of multiple knowledge involved in making piña cloths: growing, harvesting, fiber extraction, cleaning treatment, weaving, and embroidery. I'm not going in depth on this topic because my colleague, Teresa Nobre, is going to speak about this matter in a few minutes. But I just want to emphasize that we cannot dissociate plants from culture. And some final words. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the history of dissemination of plants in the Spanish Empire represents a real challenge for historians, since it is a story in constant dynamism, which has a biological and a social part. I am aware that in this process, there were dynamics of power and coercion. That is, that the exchange of plants did not take place in a neutral space. Of course, the colonial system privileged the cultivation of some species over others in order to obtain greater economic benefits. But it is also true that there was a voluntary adoption of many of these plants and that the motivation of various actors who, driven by curiosity, transported these plant resources through the oceans. However, this is an issue that deserves a separate conference. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Dr. Paulina Machuca. Thank you very much for that very interesting presentation. I'm getting more information and more stories that we can share when we do on our walks, because a lot of the plants that you mentioned are also found on our campus. And it's especially interesting that you highlighted it's not just the exchange of the plant itself, but also the tools and the technologies. And how interesting that even if some of these plants might be foreign to the Philippines, over the years we have put our indelible Filipino stamp on it, and they are now a very important and familiar part of cuisine and even fashion. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. And I invite all of our viewers, I'm sure you also have some comments and questions for Dr. Machuca. Please don't forget to type them in the chat box, whether you are in Zoom, watching us on YouTube, or on Facebook. So thank you very much again, Dr. Machuca.